PGI concept was born in France by a group of 5 persons, being the most important one a priest of the Catholic Church, who exposed part of the concept in North American magazines, and it was never properly understood. My task then is to explain more deeply and more clearly whatever he said, and in this way make it possible to be accepted by other persons apart from the Spanish-speaking people. Okay, all models of free flight are gliders, indeed, just gliders. Once the power is ended, the model will be now a glider, mostly and most important, just a glider. The rubber models must be an autopiloted model, either by design and fixed surfaces or by one moving part. In this case, I decide to have a regulated rudder to have a better control of the gliding circle. PGI will profit out of a moving rudder and will make wider possibilities of usage, because now you can adapt the model to different weather conditions. Let's say going from calm to windy moment, or going from wind to very calm moment. You can enlarge the circle of gliding of the windy model, or you can tighten the circle of a calm weather model. And in this way the model will be adapted to the conditions prevailing in that moment. The rules of the design. The span of the model dictates everything. The weather dictates the span of the model. The small model will be for windy condition, the very large model will be for very calm or fly-off conditions. The span should run between 100 to 130 centimeters. Dihedral. The minimum dihedral is supposed to be 12% to 13%. Van Rieter, the great Jan Van Rieter, also indicated that a good 14% of the span per tip of dihedral would be convenient. No, it is not all that necessary. So 12% for me, after so many models, more than 60 models I made, designed and made on this category, F1G. And 12% is fairly acceptable, combined with other things that will be in time explained. The model should not have a pylon. The model should not have a pylon. A pylon raises the center of gravity 1 to 2 centimeters. And you will see when next pages come why it is so necessary to lower the wing. Because our traction need to pass in up and down through the center of gravity. So the lower the wing, the lower the center of gravity, the less the negative traction we will have. The airfoil of these wings for F1G do not need to be so curved, because F1G only carries 6 grams per square decimeter. A wavefield will carry more than 12 grams per square decimeters. So the more curved airfoil is supposed to be used on heavier models. This is a very light model, only 6 grams per square decimeter, so you don't need to have a very bumpy airfoil, you need a smoother lower airfoil, but not so smooth, not so flat. A gentle curve, and the values of this curve are given indeed in the very last page, where my airfoil, which is a fairly acceptable airfoil, is the coordinates are given there in the last page. The chords that I have used run between 100 millimeters to 120 millimeters. The more the chord, the more the surfacing compromise. In naval language is the amount of wet area. A model with a very large chord will have far more surface in friction with the air, and a very small chord will reduce the Reynolds number, which is an important factor in these very gentle, light and slow flying models. Okay.
I have a question. Why the weather is important for determine the wingspan?
Okay.
It's not fixed. It's not fixed for the category.
No. This category has no limits in area and in size. The only restriction is a minimum weight of 70 grams of structure plus 10 grams of rubber. So a typical model ideally should weigh 81 grams. Why 81 and not 80? Because eventually the scale your model is weighing on and the competition may be wrong in 1 gram.
Yeah.
And if you have 80 and the scale indicates 79, you are out.
Ah, okay.
So you need to have an 81 grams minimum for the model.
Okay.
Thanks a lot for the contribution. Let's go now to page number 2. Okay. One more rule of the game in the design is the stab aspect ratio. It should be a minimum of 3.7 to 1 to a maximum of 4 to 1. The leading edge should be rounded. All this is because the stabilizer or tailplane will gain an enormous power along the climb. And the gain is such that if you have a large aspect ratio, your tailplane will gain enormously in lift and will not permit the nose to go up and maintain a good climbing attitude. A rounded leading edge also soften the raise of the lift curve, so it promotes the tail down and the nose up, which is the aim, climbing and climbing. Okay. The area of rudder should be between 75 to 100 square centimeters. For me, I prefer a full moving rudder. For me, it's better. I can perceive better the amount of motion that I induce to change the radius of the circle of gliding. And this rudder should always be rect for the climb or slightly left. Never to the right. At high speed, a rudder to the right will induce inevitably a spin. So your rudder should be completely rect or slightly to the left. Or you can have a fixed rudder and you will provide the circle of gliding by tilt of the tailplane. This tilt of the tailplane always works well with a center of gravity more rearward than 58 to 60%. The tilt is far more effective with a center of gravity around 65, 70, 75, perhaps 80% center of gravity. Something very risky indeed. Your wings should not be warped, should not have any warp, only what you produce at the tips, a minus 1.5 degrees of negative at the tips, no more than that. You don't need more than that. And both wings need to be identical. No wing differential, no wash in, no wash out with any crazy purpose. All this wash in and wash out perhaps works well with a heavy, massive model like an F1A or a Wakefield model, because they have the amount of inertia enough to go through the air to turbulent air, but a very light model like an F1G has no such a mass. So any crazy warp, any undesired warp will produce nefastic effect. Nefastic effect indeed. Okay. It was said by a famous German Wakefield flyer that the best wing wiggler, the best wing differential is produced by a high dihedral. I believe on that, I accept it, and it's true for me. One more detail. This concept simplifies models to a great degree. You don't need to have mechanism for wing wiggler. You don't need to have a variable incident tailplane. You don't need to have a rudder that has 2 or 3 positions. Nothing like that. This model do not depend on the quality of the rubber. If you have a rubber which is rather poor in quality, little torque, low torque, the model only will vary the attitude of the climbing pattern. That's all that will produce the difference in rubber quality. If you have an autopiloted model through the timer, moving wings, moving rudder, moving tailplane, you always need to have a very well-defined and repetitive amount of rubber motors. If they are not equal among them, the speed of climbing will vary and the response of the small surface like the rudder and tailplane will vary enormously. So we are independent of the quality of the rubber to some extent. Well, if you have a very, very poor rubber, then probably you will not climb all that high as you expect. But PGI is far more tolerant with the quality of rubber. That is the word, tolerant. The rudder can be actuated by the folding of the blades of your propeller. You need to design some tricky things to produce that. Or you can use the blades to induce the gliding circle. If you fold them, I always use my blades far apart from the fuselage. Close to the fuselage, it produces many corners, and the air doesn't like corners. The air wants and desires always to flow freely. That's why I use separated blades, very much separated. Something like 80 millimeters separation between the hinges. So the air can flow freely and it is not fighting against little corners and things like that. It has been demonstrated that these blades folded close to the fuselage are not better than the separated blades. It was demonstrated in a wind tunnel in Italy, and it was seen by a famous Anselmo Seri Wakefield flyer. He saw all these. The tunnel had smoke lines, and it was demonstrated that the turbulence was terrible, and it's far better to have them separated. It's my belief, and I accept it very well. Okay, the rudder can be actuated at the folding of the blades, and the DT by any mean you have, either a mechanical timer, a viscous timer, or an electronic timer. That is up to your pocket and the money you have. Yes. One of the advantages of this video is that you can see it many times, and I hope that I can enrich the explanation as much as possible to eliminate big doubts and questions that many persons still have in their heads. Let me light my cigarette. This is a medium weather model. It is something like 110 centimeters span, 120 millimeters chord, a very small outer panel, 100 millimeter chord there. It has 3 degrees down traction. It has 3 degrees approximately to the right. That's it. The blades will never fold touching the fuselage will be open. It is 80 millimeters separation between the hinges. BPC, that is tail moment arm, in English tail moment arm, must be at least half the span plus a maximum of 10 centimeters. So if you have a span of 100, you will have 55, 60 centimeter maximum. A long tail moment arm is a very good damper of oscillations. Every oscillation is losing time. You are losing time. Every oscillation you need to recover the gliding speed, you need to dive, you lose altitude, and then you lose time. The emphasis of the traction line is this. If you tract from the center of gravity of a massive body, you will describe a rect line. If you tract from the upper part of the center of gravity, you will induce a pitching down. And if you do it from the lower part of the center of gravity, you will induce an upward moment. Traction must be from the total center of gravity. Center of gravity has a position along the chord and up and down of the mass of the model. So you have to discover this position by any means you can do geometrically to avoid the moment of the weight or mass that usually the people compensate moving tailplane or moving other things, producing very strong interrogations, doubts. Every time that you move the things out of here, you are inducing perhaps drag or the obligation of moving some other things. The simplicity of PGI was to discover that you have to tract from the center of gravity, from the total center of gravity. That is the simplicity of the concept. Je ne fais pas ces choses en français parce que c'est plus difficile pour moi que pour les autres et je sais bien que tous les Français connaissent très bien le PGI. Okay, let me go back what has been done in Spanish relative to a classical Figueroa model. In this figure you have the ramp of descent, which was established by throwing the model a few hundred times from a certain repetitive altitude, and this ramp is 4 degrees and 30 minutes. The airfoil is mounted at around 6 degrees, the typical angle of attack for maximum gliding. Indeed, it should be 5.5 or so. All the rest, this is 5.5 geometrically. Aerodynamically, the angle of attack is a little bit more. It may go up to 7 or 8 degrees in an airfoil that will tolerate such a high angle. You can see that the model, it is not aligned with the ramp. The front part of the fuselage is higher than the ramp. And you will see that the tail is hanging down, but the downwash from the wing will push the air down for a huge amount of the tail. Let's say a good half of the boom or the rear fuselage, it is following the line of the deflected air of the wing. But then this deflected air or downwash will recover and will be parallel more or less to the ramp. And the rest of the tail, the rest of the boom, which is very fine. These booms I use are the fishing cane made out of carbon. It starts at around 5-6 millimeters and end in something like 3/32 of an inch, or let's say 2.5-3 millimeters diameter on the back. A very fine piece of material cut in the air is far better than a thick 10 millimeters boom ending in 7 or 8 millimeters here. The drag of a rod can be calculated very easily. You can find it somewhere. Now, half of my rudder is immersed in the downwash, and only a very small portion of my rudder is in clean air and in undisturbed air. That makes that my tailplane, my Helmut airfoil tailplane, it is working in clean air, absolutely non-disturbed air. If the model by any chance make a nose down, the tailplane will be immersed in this area momentaneously and will reduce efficiency and fall down. And if the model pitch up by any turbulence, the tailplane will be even deeper into very clean air. The downwash of the wing produces a reduction of pressure and also a lower speed of the tailplane. The wing is always working at, let's say, the 3.1 meters per second. But if the tailplane is immersed here, it will be immersed in an air that tend to follow the wing. So the tailplane placed up here will be working at lower speed than the wing. And the tailplane has a very small Reynolds numbers. So it's very risky. That's why I prefer by design to locate my stabilizer in a very clean air. So they both fly at the same speed. Believe it or not, it's true. The why of all these things. Without pylon is to lower the center of gravity and reduce the negative traction, down traction. High dihedral provides lateral stability, and it also acts as a wing wiggler, and it favors the climb in a corkscrew attitude. Makes a very sure, very secure climb in wind. BPC or tail moment arm. A long tail moment arm is a good damper of longitudinal stability. Every change of attitude will be dampened first by the tailplane. With a long tail moment arm, you have a great damping action. After damping action, there is another action which is the correction of the attitude, and finally the ultimate action of the tailplane is to produce some lift. And because of the need of all these is that I had came to this definition and form of fuselage. It's a very fine, thin tail bloom that produces very low drag. Also, my rudder is half of it is flying in the turbulence, only half of it is flying in pure clean air. A long tail moment arm is a good damper, and it's a good insurance to have the tailplane working in clean air. Stability, stability, stability. Most of all, stability in models which are so susceptible to be disturbed. These are very light models, very little weight. They have no penetration, they have no mass, they have no inertia. That's it for the English. In page number 4, we will go to page number 5. Center of gravity placed somewhere along the chord of the wing. Center of gravity placed somewhere up or down of the whole body of the model. The traction line must be aligned with this by using some amount of negative. By geometric tricks you can come to it by sanding the entrance of the fuselage. So the traction line finally, the traction line is at the middle of the entrance, the round fuselage, and you have to sand this to obtain this traction line passing through this center of gravity. To find this center of gravity, you have to re-erect all the model, rudder, propeller, so you have the position. Then you tilt the model, one wing up, one wing down, and then you separate the wings slightly, and you have some sort of a hook to establish and find the position of the center of gravity up or down of the whole body. That's it. Eventually, you can change this center of gravity gently, a bit forward or a bit rearward, depending on your need, but it will induce some distortion of the line. Don't worry, it's such a small amount, it's only 1 millimeter at the most, so no problem. Okay, every traction must pass through the center of gravity, the total center of gravity, to avoid pitching up or pitching down due to the weight of the model. It's like kicking a ball. If you kick the ball in the center, it will describe a straight line. If you kick the ball on the side, if you tract from the side, you will have a curve, a pitching of the ball. So it's like in football. Then, when you have all this settled down properly, you will have to harmonize the glider, wing and tailplane, to this traction line. You will harmonize, that is to say, you produce more negative in the wing and more negative in the stabilizer, or you will produce more positive on the wing, and also, so the harmonization is the glider harmonized to the traction line. And this is made in such a way, if the model is properly built according to the details given of length of boom, size of tailplane, quality of the airfoils. This is done to the point that the model will describe a rect line at high power, will not pitch down, will not pitch up, and also at the very end of the climb the model should be at the most slightly over elevated or horizontal. That's it. And then you release the rudder, and there is a gliding curve that will predominate along the gliding time. That's it for number 5. We go to number 6. Pre-trimming of the model at the workshop. The whole model completely re-erected without gluing the entrance ring, which is in plastic or metal, aluminum most of the time. Don't glue that ring until you have sanded the entrance of the tube in such a way that the vertical line of the square is passing through the center of gravity. The drawing, the figure indicate you clearly what is supposed to be done. Okay. Now, with this configuration, now we can glue the ring and we go to the field for the first flights. Eventually you will have to change the side traction according to the needs of the model. 3 turns in the climb for a windy model, so you can change that lateral traction a little bit more, a little bit less for the calm model that only need to do 1.5 at the most turns in the climb. Simple and not very difficult to understand. At the field, page number 7. A very calm day, let's say center of gravity 60% approx. The gliding circle slightly open. The wing is mounted at +2 degrees relative to the traction line. and the stab is mounted at -2 degrees relative to the wing. We are at the field. We haven't done any gliding yet. Okay. So you have a décalage, a differential angle between wing and tapering of around 2 degrees. You glide by hand, no rubber, no power yet, and you correct either with the wing or the stab you are gliding for the center of gravity you have selected. Do not over elevate it, do not let it dive. Just simply have a decent smooth glide without over elevation. First charge of the rubber. Let's say is 6 loops of rubber 3 by 1 millimeters approximately. This is for the middle model. If you have a very calm model, will be only 5 loops. And if you have a windy model, perhaps you will have 7 loops of 3 by 1 millimeter. Okay. 100 turns to the rudder. Only 100 turns. The rudder should be straight, rect, or slightly to the left. A little bit to the left. You have to be sure that these 100 turns will be over in 10 to 15 seconds at the most. And your rudder, if you have a controlled rudder, it must go to the gliding position at the end of the rubber, at the folding of the blades. Don't forget that the circle incline is commanded by the traction, the degrees you have of traction to the right. That is the circle, and is according to the need of a windy, middle or calm model. It is already said that. If you have a fixed rudder, your model will glide by tilt. The circle at glide will be by tilt. So you have a fixed rudder, no problem. Never, but never have a rudder deflected to the right for the climb, because the rudder is so strong at high speed that you will induce a spin or something like that. This is due to the speed. Rudder is very effective when you gain velocity, and if you have a rudder to the right, inevitably, because of precession and other things, you will have a dive or spin to the right. 100 turns to the rudder. Rudder absolutely straight or slightly left. You have to release the model with something like 10 to 15 degrees nose up, gently. The model climbs slightly in a circle and stable. Blades folded, rudder is released and glides. Okay. Your model was already a glider that was gently gliding without being too over elevated. Then go to 150 to 200 turns, no more than that. Charge that amount of turns in your rubber, and every time release the model with more and more nose up. You started with 10 to 15 degrees, you may come now to 25-30 degrees nose up. Do not push too hard, let it go gently. When you arrive to 280 to 300 turns for a motor of 6 loops of 3 by 1 millimeters, you are entering in the zone of high power of your rubber. Your model, as long as you increment the turns in your rubber, will open the climbing circle. At the beginning it was well-defined circle. Now the more the turns, it will tend to go rect, and finally when you enter definitely in the high power zone, more than 300 turns, your model should go straight for 2 to 4 seconds at 70 or more degrees nose up. And this is because the increment of velocity makes your rudder more effective. So the side traction to the right doesn't predominate, because your rudder with gentle left is avoiding this. So you describe a rather red line, and when your power start fading away, your rudder loses velocity and loses effectiveness, and the predominant force is the side traction. The loss of speed in the climb after high power makes the traction line predominant over the left rudder. Simple like that. Then you will have eventually to adjust your traction line, because you want to go to 3.5 turns in climb. And when you do that, you increment the right traction. You may eventually need to give a little bit more of left rudder, because the model will tend to the right at high power, and then you want to make this straight. The best line for gaining altitude is a red line, so you give a bit more of left until you recover the red line for 2 to 4 seconds. When the speed reduces, traction to the right becomes predominant and the model starts turning. I hope my poor English is good enough for you. The disagreeable case, page number 9. Disagreeable case is a model which is absolutely the other way around of the previous pages. Okay, first flight, 100 turns, the models hung up, stalled, and dived to the ground. Solution: increase the positive of the wing. Very peculiar thing.
Yeah.
Increase the positive of the wing and remake the gliding, giving positive to the stabilizer. Let's say half a degree to the wing and whatever is necessary at the tailplane to regain the gliding.
It's totally different.
It's totally opposite to any other thing.
Yeah.
It's totally opposite to other situations. Remake the 100 turns flight, or if you are afraid, don't put 100, put only 60 turns until your model doesn't hang or doesn't dive whatever you are correcting. Okay? And insist with the procedure until you reach the situation of page number 8. The climbing is dominated by the stabilizer, the tailplane. The tailplane is the predominant piece in a climb. Any irregularity that you find after you have trimmed your climb, if you have any irregularity in your glide, never correct the glide with the tailplane. Tailplane is already set to produce a good climb. Every correction of an over elevation or dive, you should correct it with the wing, only with the wing. That is extremely important. It may sound opposite to whatever you did in the past, but this is the way. Once you have a rather decent climb and something shows up in the glide, an over elevation, whatever thing, oscillation, pitching, correct with the wing or a little bit of weight either at the nose or at the tail. Other way around, the inverse case. First flight, 100 tons, the models dive, nailing the nose on the ground. With 100 turns, the model just simply dive. You launched your model properly, gently as you did, as it was recommended previously, but now the model just simply dives and it put the nose in the ground. Diminish the positive of the wing and just simply add negative the tailplane to remake the glide. Your model just simply did this. Okay, what you need now is to lower the tailplane. For that you need to make your tailplane more negative. If you make the tailplane negative, you make the wing negative also, to maintain the glider always working. If this is not properly understood, I'm sorry, is that all what I can do in English? Okay. Repeat the flight and insist with this correction until you enter into the page number 8 condition. But do everything very slowly, very gently. Let's say little changes of a quarter of a degree, half a degree will be enough until you reach to condition 8. Be patient, very patient. The reward is incredible. Be very gentle with every change you make. With time and some good results, let's say positive results, you will feel very confident, and eventually you will start trimming, adjusting the very fine details until you get whatever you dream. In general, a PGI design with high dihedral and long tailplane, long boom, you have a good amount of stability ensured in advance to the very first flights. In general, PGI is very forgiving. Stick to the rules, avoid the warps, the strange warps, the irregular warps. Avoid the excess of area in your tailplane. Use between 2.5 square decimeters to 3 square decimeters area of tailplane. Maintain the high dihedral 12%. Don't use a very curved wing airfoil. Vincent Rieter used to say that whatever chord you select, the top camber should never be more than 9.5 millimeters. That's what I use, 9.4. Okay, this page, number 10, and the very last, details, is based on experience, on practical empirical experience. There is no more than that. A propeller will be efficient from the 20% to the 100% of it. In between, the maximum efficiency is obtained at 70% of the length of the blade, from the axle to the tip. In my case, I use blades with a correct distribution of angles, something that produces a plus of 4 degrees more of attack here and a little washout here and at the tip, with a thickness of 5%. My propellers are made in a mold. They are made out of balsa, very light balsa, with several small layers, one half the way and two the whole length of the blade. The same amount on top and underneath. My blades typically will have a weight of 4 grams, including the gadgetry that I use as a hinge and also as a changer of pitch, because I can change also the angle of my blades. Okay, what is supposed to be the curvature or the mean camber of your airfoil? Whatever airfoil you can make is okay. There are peculiar airfoils, but nothing has been proved to be better than others. The camber of the airfoil should be around 3%, no less than 2%, no more than 4%. 3% is a fairly unacceptable amount of camber of your airfoil. My blades, as I said, are made on a mold with fiberglass, the lightest possible fiberglass, 0.75 grams per square yard, which is something like 20 grams per square meter, roughly. That's it about my propellers. We already spoke about the diameter of propellers, and the PD, the relation of pitch and diameter, is around 1.3 times the diameter. Okay, this is one insisting detail of about velocity produce effectivity of the small areas. I insist always on this very much, a lot, because what I mean by this is that the rudder will be useful at the climb only if you have higher speed. At lower speed, the rudder tend to disappear, and the predominant things to define the curve of climbing will be the traction, the side traction. What is supposed to be this? This is décalage, or the difference of angle of wing and tail plane. In calm models F1G, don't use more than 1.5 degrees of décalage, whatever the center of gravity is good for that. For a middle model, from 1.5 to 2.5 degrees of décalage. And for a windy weather model, don't use more than 3 degrees of décalage. If you use more than 3 degrees, you will be dragging. You will have a lot of drag at high speed. You will not climb as high as possible. Also, one detail that has not been mentioned in Spanish and will be told in English only is the next. You know the camber of your wing airfoil, whatever the camber is. Suppose that the camber is 5%. 5% of the cord is the mean camber at any position you have. Tail plane should be at least a 2% less of camber than the wing airfoil. 2% less. If you have 5% mean camber here, use here no more than 3% of camber. Otherwise, you will have a very reactive tail plane that will not let your model nose up. It will tend to flatten the climb. Dihedral, as mentioned before, a good 12% is a necessity, is a must. And washout never exceed a minus 1.5 at the tip. With a high dihedral, you geometrically diminish the angle of attack of the outer panel. So with a high dihedral, you don't need all that washout that typically the people will introduce in the models. 1.5 degrees of washout is more than enough. 1 is fairly acceptable. Now, the quality of the rubber. Quality of the rubber is extremely important in autopiloting models that moves wings, rudder and tail plane. Why is that? Because you need a certain level of torque, minimum, to have the velocity enough to make a rudder and tail plane react properly. If you don't get the rubber, the appropriate rubber for such a speed you need in the model, your areas will not react properly. In the case of PGI, the quality of the rubber is not all that important. If you have a lower quality rubber, you may put one more loops perhaps. Okay, if you don't want to put that, no problem. The low quality rubber, the lower torque, the lower force you available will produce a very gentle turn and will avoid the reg line. The reg line is a product of the high velocity, the high quality of rubber. If you don't have that high quality, the motor will turn immediately because of the lower quality. The rudder will not have a speed enough to maintain the rect and will be predominant the lateral traction, the side traction. So PGI doesn't worry very much about the quality of the rubber. If you are in such a position that you cannot reach the best rubber, okay, don't worry, use a PGI system and it will tolerate the lower quality of rubber and will still give you a decent altitude. That's it, game over. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I can help you with PGI. My name is here, Edgardo Figueroa. My email is here. You can email me in English, Spanish, French and Italian. I will always answer in English because I do not write well Italian and French, but I can do it fairly acceptable in English and very well in Spanish. Ça c'est tout, mesdames et messieurs. Vielen Dank, meine Damen und Herren.